All right, so this is your Elements of Fiction assessment. This short story is going to be Autumntime by A. Lentini, and I'm just going to read it to you. And I'll do a couple kind of think alouds as I go. I saw my first tree today. Dad finally broke down and took us to the East Boston Urban Center 3 after Mom had been harping on it for the past 2 weeks. I think he was glad we went after all, because he was smiling quietly all during the trip back. Dad used to tell me stories about the trees that still existed when he was a boy. There weren't very many even then, with the urbanization program in full swing, but most people had seen at least one tree by the time they started school. It wasn't like nowadays, at any rate. Oh, I've seen the plastic ones. Practically every street has a few of them. But you can tell the plastic ones are artificial just from looking at pictures in the microdot library. And now, after seeing a real tree, I can say for sure that the artificial ones aren't the same at all. Okay, so this narrator and the mom and dad go out to a place because they are going to go and look at something. But one thing that I thought was really, really interesting is that it says, Dad used to tell me stories about the trees that still existed when he was a boy. There weren't very many even then. So it sounds like there's not a lot of trees or any at all at this point, and they have been replaced by plastic trees. This morning when we got up, the house was all excited. Mom dialed a light breakfast of toast and synthetic milk so that we wouldn't waste time eating. And when we finished, the three of us took an elevator bus up to the 4th level, where we caught the air track to Brooklyn. From there, we took another elevator bus down to main level, rode the monorail to the inner city subway station 27, and got the second sub-level AA train to Boston. Our expectations were so high that Dad and I didn't mind it when Mom told us again how the tree was discovered. Okay, we definitely know like time period if you're thinking about that. We're talking about they're dialing in a light breakfast, toast, synthetic milk. They're taking an air track. The O'Brien home was one of the few examples of old-style wooden structures that hadn't been demolished in Boston's urban renewal campaign at the turn of the century. The family had been able to avoid this because of its wealth and political influence, and the house was passed on through several generations to the present. Old Man O'Brien had no heirs, so when he died, the family home went up for auction, and the urban center bought it. When local officials arrived for an appraisal, they discovered that the house had a backyard, which is forbidden by zoning restrictions. So this house has been passed on for generations to generations. The man passes away and he doesn't have any children or anybody to give this house to. So they sell it to the urban center, and they find a backyard, which nobody is supposed to have. In the yard was a live tree. An oak was what Mom called it. When the news of the tree's discovery leaked out, quite a few sightseers stopped by to have a look at it, and the local government, realizing the money-making potential, began charging admission and advertising the place. By now, it had become a favorite spot for school field trips and family excursions, such as ours. So what did they find in the backyard? A live tree called an oak, an O-K-E. We would call that an oak, an O-A-K. And did you see that? People go on field trips to see the one live tree. Imagine that. When we arrived in Maine, Boston, we rode the elevator bus up to ground level and caught a monorail out to East Boston Urban Center 3. An air-cush taxi took us the rest of the way to the residence. The home itself was unimpressive. It had none of the marble gloss or steely sheen of modern buildings, but was rather a dull white color with the paint peeling in places. Dad paid the admission fee, and we spent the next 15 minutes on a dull guided tour of the house. The rooms were roped off to keep people from touching anything, but there were no windows facing the illegal backyard anyway, so it didn't really matter that I couldn't enter the rooms on that side. My mind was on the tree, and I thought the inside tour would never end, but soon we were walking through a doorway hidden in one of the bookshelves and into the backyard. The yard was big, at least 10 by 20 feet, and I was surprised to find real grass growing on the sides of the concrete walkway built for tourists. The grass didn't distract me for long, however, because I just couldn't help noticing the tree. So it says that in order to get to the backyard, they had to walk through a doorway hidden in one of the bookshelves. And they're saying the yard was big, at least 10 by 20 feet. Think about your own backyard. It's not incredibly big at all. It was located at one end of the yard, and there was a mesh fence around it for protection. It was similar in form to the plastic trees I'd seen, but there was much more to it than that. You could see details more intricate than any man made plant, and it was alive. Long ago, someone had carved their initials in the bark, and you could see where the wound had healed. But best of all was the smell. It was a fresh, living odor, alien to the antiseptic world outside with all its metal, plastic, and glass. I wanted to touch the bark, but the fence prevented me from doing so. Mom and Dad just breathed deeply and stared up with smiles on their faces. The three of us stood there for a moment, and then the tour guide told us to make room for the next group. I didn't want to go. In fact, I almost felt like crying. So I thought this was really kind of interesting that down here it's saying best of all was the smell. It was a fresh, living odor, alien to the antiseptic world outside. So the world that they're living in right now is full of metal, plastic, and glass, and as they're saying, like artificial trees. So the narrator finally gets to smell like a real living thing, which is this tree. On the way back, Mom and Dad were silent, and I read through one of the brochures the guide had passed out. When I came to the part that said the O'Brien home would be open only for the rest of this year, I was sad. They intended to tear down the place to make room for some kind of insurance building, and the tree will have to go too. For the rest of the trip, I just sat still, holding the object in my pocket, which I had picked off the grass in the O'Brien's backyard. I think it's called an acorn. What can you grow from an acorn? Do you think the narrator knows this at all? And they're going to cut down the last remaining tree. Ugh. Hopefully you like the story. Best of luck on your test.